Welcome to Module number 11. What is the minimum necessary standard? If you are having trouble accessing any of these modules, contact the Chief Privacy Officer at privacy@uvm.edu or call the Office of Compliance and Privacy Services at 802-656-3086. Otherwise, let's begin. With some exceptions, the privacy rule imposes a minimum necessary requirement on all permitted uses and disclosures of PHI by a covered entity. This means that a covered entity must apply policies and procedures or criteria it has developed to limit certain uses and disclosures of PHI, including those for research purposes, to the information reasonably necessary to accomplish the purpose of the requested use or disclosure. The minimum necessary standard requires covered entities to evaluate their practices and enhance safeguards as needed to limit unnecessary or inappropriate access to and disclosure of PHI. The minimum necessary standard does not apply to disclosures to or requests by a healthcare provider for treatment purposes, disclosures to the individual who is the subject of the information, uses or disclosures made pursuant to an authorization, uses or disclosures required for compliance with HIPAA, disclosures to the Department of Health and Human Services when disclosure is required under the privacy rule for enforcement purposes, and other uses and disclosures required by law. As you can see, research is not listed here. If you are both a provider and a researcher, this understandably can get very confusing. To avoid a violation, you need to apply the right role to the right use. If you are a provider, you may have access and have authorization to use PHI for treatment, and the minimum necessary rule may not apply in those situations. However, that does not give you blanket approval to use the PHI for other purposes, including research. You need to make sure the use is authorized before using PHI, and you need to make sure you are only using the minimum amount necessary for the research. You have now reached the end of Module number 11. If you are taking this training as part of a requirement, you will have to answer questions in order to move on. Next up is Module 12. How does research affect individual rights?